Uh, all right, so it's right around that time where we're really getting ready for a draft. It's right in between the Senior Bowl and the Combine. A lot of interesting prospects to talk about. And the dude I want to bring in somebody, Scott Kennedy. Scott, you can follow him on Twitter at Scout Kennedy. Also on YouTube. Links will be in the description below. But Scott was there in Mobile during the Senior Bowl. And he has a lot to say about some of these prospects. And we're going to have him on to talk about these draft prospects. Scott, how you doing today?
Quincy, I'm doing good, my friend. Appreciate you having me on. And the Senior Bowl was a lot of fun this year. It really was. And what's interesting about the Senior Bowl is normally you don't go there for skill because the skill guys don't make it 4 years. They don't last to the seniors. The top skill guys are gone in the Junior Bowl. They're usually gone. So this year you had your quarterbacks down there. 5 of the top 6 rated quarterbacks were down there. And where I really was impressed, I thought the trenches, especially the defensive line, was eons better than what I saw last year at the Senior Bowl. And the Senior Bowl had some pretty good players come out of the interior offensive line, Creed Humphrey, Quid Miners, guys like that. But this year, it's just such a deep class. Everybody wants to poo-poo on this class saying it's not so good at the top. That might be true. But I see guys through 50 that if you're drafting a couple times in the top 50, you should be pretty excited about what you can do in the trenches.
Yeah. We were talking about this kind of before we started it, where it's one of those drafts where like 2 second round picks are more valuable than almost like what a top 10 pick, because there's just so many guys that you would want on this roster. I think you hit on something there, and that's what the Senior Bowl opened to me was like, oh, this defensive tackle class is not as bad as it's been reported to be, because there are some very interesting prospects. That being said, knowing that we're going into Combine, it feels like the Combine is really when the NFL world as a whole turns their eyes towards the draft, turns their eyes towards that offseason phase of the next season for the NFL, right? We're kind of in that in between limbo period. And being at the Senior Bowl, watching these guys yourself, is there anybody that you feel like once they get to that combine, once they get some of these measurables in or anything, that they're really going to have a jump in their draft stock where people are going to catch up on these prospects?
I'll tell you one guy who I thought his draft stock skyrocketed. And I was told before I was coming into this, when I said I was going to do a Cleveland Browns show, that the Browns don't draft guys that are 23 years old. So this guy might be off the board already, but I'm going to share this video for you. And this isn't the same one that I showed you earlier. This is a different guys. There's, like I said, there's so many guys that I'm actually pretty excited about that there's a ton of them. So this is Jermaine Johnson. He is, let's see, what did he measure at down there in I don't know that I had measures on him, but he's like 6'5", 245, 255, right in that neighborhood. And that's what I want the combine for. Because just I throw a little B-roll in there just to see you get an idea of how he moves. Nice punch, turns a corner well. But watch how he uses his hands coming off the edge here. That's Max Mitchell of University of Louisiana. Okay, now he comes off the other side. And this is how he's going to use his hands in the pass rush. Bye.
Yep. It reminds me a lot.
Johnson has a chance to move up into the top 10 if he tests the way he played down at the Senior Bowl. And that's where you start talking about the guys in the combine, Quincy, because now it becomes, for lack of a better word, nut crunching time. Now we've got an idea of where guys are going to go. And it's like, okay, do I want Quincy? Do I want Jermaine Johnson, or do I want George Karlaftis? Do I want Kayvon Thibodeau, or do I want Aiden Hutchinson? There's 4 edges I just mentioned that could go in the top 15. Do I want Trayvon Walker in there? What do they do? So this is where you're going to start. You start getting that separation, which can be the difference between you getting a guy at 7 or waiting back until 13. And this is when it becomes a little more, yeah, I like this guy. He could be around to, okay, now we're going to start putting them into some order. And I think the combine helps separate them a little bit when you're talking about the very fine margins between a first round type of talent.
Yeah, it's just one of those super interesting drafts this year where there's no clear cut one really. Like maybe it's Aiden Hutchinson, maybe it's not. It depends on situation there. And then you look up and down the draft and you're like, man, like this is one of those years where mock drafts are especially useless because we have no idea who's going to be where. You know what I mean? Like, it would not surprise me if Jermaine Johnson went early in the first round. It would not surprise me if a lot of these guys that we're not talking about right now went early in the first round, just because I feel like we just have people in the first round of this discussion at the top 10 just because we're used to talking about them a lot, right? Like, and not really because we really feel like they're going to be it. That's what happens whenever we talk about, oh, the draft stinks or whatever. It's like, usually it's just because we don't have a good read on what's going to be in this draft. I mean, I remember it felt like this in 2013. That draft was pretty much deemed bad. Now, it wasn't that great of a draft, but it was a draft where like Matthew went in the third round, you know what I mean? And all kind of other stuff happened. So it's one of those interesting ones. Like EJ Manuel, he went first. He was the first quarterback taken in that draft, if I'm not wrong, right? He was 13.
This is the kind of draft where you're very thankful they changed the pay scales, because a few years ago, wasn't that long ago, the highest paid player in the NFL was the first quarterback drafted. Usually, was a quarterback taken in the top 3, was the highest paid player in the NFL. That's insane. Guy hasn't even thrown a ball in the NFL. So the rookie wage scale, while I'm not necessarily for capping wages in a monopoly business that the NFL is, I'm more of a free market guy. It definitely made sense. And this is a year you don't want to have to be tied down to a humongous contract to a top 5 pick, because this is a draft where you might be better off drafting from 7 to 15 than from 1 to 6, financially speaking, especially when it comes around to deciding on that 5th-year option. Because every single player that we talk about in the top 10 has questions, except for maybe one. That's Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame. And he's a safety. Nobody wants a safety that high. I'm telling you, Quincy, if I'm drafting, I might say to hell with it, take the best player in the draft, and the best player in this draft might be Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame.
It's definitely interesting. Now, we kind of touched on quarterback. Let's touch on quarterback just a little bit here. What did you think of this quarterback class? Because they were pretty much all down there in Mobile. Did you able to watch them? Is the book right on them where everybody's like, these are second tier kind of quarterback prospects in a normal draft?
My final thought, or at least my initial thought or whatever, was that I'm that much more sure I don't want any of these guys in the top 10. I don't want any of these guys in the top 10. If there was one, you have to take one, Scott, in the top 10. Who's it going to be? I'd take Malik Willis, because he's got the highest upside. He's got the biggest arm, the most athletic. If he hits, he's going to be the one that hits the highest. But there's no guarantee there. He was a one read guy even down there. Like, he had a nice play on a strange rule where they had to either score a touchdown or give the ball over, and they let him scramble for 40 yards, and that play goes viral on Twitter and stuff. I'm like, yeah, but he was like 2 for 5 for 11 yards passing. It's just, it's not the year that you want to need a quarterback. That's next year. That's next year. So
the next 2 years, I think they have some good quarterbacks.
The rules of will tell you that somebody's going to be the guy. Somebody's going to come out of this and be a pretty good quarterback. Somebody will. But there isn't a consensus for a reason. There's no way to say, Desmond Ridder, Cincinnati. I really like him. I want him in the second. I want him in the second round. I don't want him in the first. I don't like him in the first. Sam Howell. Okay. Him and Malik Willis are very, very similar players. You look at him, 6'1", 220 pounds, runner, built like a running back, good arm. Yeah, he was hot and cold. Maybe. There's a lot of big question marks. And that's how the top of the draft is this year. Big question marks. The safest player might be offensive tackle Evan Neal, but he's not Penny Sewell from last year. He's safe. Man, you got the number 1 pick. Do you want safe or do you want, yes, I want that guy? I don't know that guy's there just yet, especially at the top.
This is one of those drafts where everybody who has, like, I bet all the Lions fans are like, we should trade the number 1 overall pick for a pick next year. And nobody wants to do that. You know what I mean? Like, I've been in that situation as a fan of multiple teams where I'm like, oh, yeah, we should just, because when the Cavs had the first pick in the Anthony Bennett draft, we were like, we should trade this.
It's even worse than basketball, isn't it?
Yeah. And then you're just like, no, nobody wants this draft pick, right? It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you could trade back, but nobody wants to take the dude at 1. Again, like, it's easier to operate in this draft in the middle of it than it is to operate at the beginning of it. Because when, let's say you're the Ravens, you want to tackle, right? you're probably going to feel better trading up in front of Cleveland at 13 to get somebody like Penning than you are to just like jump all the way to get a Neal in the first round. It's like, it's just one of those things. It's real tough to operate in the top 5 when there's really like, unless somebody goes Kyle Hamilton crazy, you really have no way of getting anybody to do it. Or maybe somebody just falls in love with Malik Willis and they want to take him as early as possible. Even if you're that team, that there's a good chance that like maybe 5 of the teams in the top 10 are out on him, right? Because he's an in or out prospect, right? Either you're in on this dude or you're out on him. So it's not like it's not even like a Justin Fields where maybe people want him, but that he's not going to make it past 11.
I wanted Justin Fields at 2 last year. I'll go to my grave saying that one. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I thought I would have taken Justin Fields at 2. I would have taken him at 4 with the Falcons. I would have taken him at 9 with the Broncos. And that he slid, and he'd be number 1. Justin Fields would go number 1 overall, hands down, in this draft class. But you're talking about trading up, to get a tackle if you're Baltimore. Again, Ike Mekwano looks really good, probably going to go top 5. But I think what we're going to hear a lot about, and be careful, you're going to hear a lot of talking up of these quarterbacks because there's teams that want to come down, and you get the best trades when it's for a quarterback. I'm not going to get next year's. I'm not getting a 2023 first round pick from Baltimore to come up and trade for a tackle. I'm going to get it from the Steelers because they want to move into the 8 spot and take Malik Willis. That's how I maximize my value. So this is the lying season. Don't believe anything you hear at all, because you're going to hear all these teams. Oh yeah, we really want a quarterback. We really like a quarterback. We really like this guy and this guy and this guy. Baloney. Nobody likes these guys.
It's one of those years too where like there's a rush to trade back, and I wonder if that's just going to collapse the entire draft market, where it's like everybody wants to trade back, so now nobody gets to trade back.
Nobody does.
Yeah, or really what it's going to do to the end rounds of these drafts, right? Because a lot of what happens in the draft is, I'll just trade these picks for next year, right? I'll give you my third, give me a second in next year's draft, or small trades like that. And ain't nobody gonna be willing to give up any 2023 picks for anything in this draft unless they are really in love with the player. And maybe like the win now teams are going to be able to get away with it, but like especially rebuilding teams, nobody with the early pick is really going to be able to be willing to do that, because next year, Bryce Young's coming out. CJ Stroud is coming out, and to say that they're better quarterback prospects than Malik Willis would be putting it lightly. I mean, like, these are accomplished college athletes who are much more polished than anybody coming out in this draft class. So it's one of those weird draft years. Also want to talk about the trenches, right? I think the defensive tackle class here, I mean, it's deep. It's real deep. There's nobody that I would want to take in like the top 5 of the draft, but it's a tackle, right? Like nobody really.
That might be true any draft these days. Yeah. I disagree. I'm still a believer in Aaron Donald, something like that. But he's kind of a freak. But I guess most of the guys I remember growing up were still defensive ends. The Reggie Wright, Bruce Smith types. As far as the old timer, Reggie was 300 pounds. He could play inside when he needed to. So is the tackle devalued enough? Jordan Davis, if you're running a 3-4, he is a round hole, round peg, 360-pound plug that instantly improves your defense. Instantly. But you're going to take him out. You're going to play him 2 downs a game. He's a 2-down player. Do you want him in the top 10? Maybe, maybe not. That's why I'm going to show some video here, Quincy. That's why I kind of like Travis Jones. I'm going to bring up Travis Jones' Senior Bowl highlights here. I like Travis Jones because I think you can get him in the 20s to 40, 25 to 40 range at 6'4", 330 pounds. And I think he's good enough to play defensive tackle. So I think he's not relying on scheme as much because he's more mobile than Jordan Davis, even if he's not quite as big and strong. But to say that this guy isn't that big and strong is silly because he's 6'4", 330 pounds. And you see the mobility he's got. Those guys are picking up gloves, and he's hardly having to bend over to do it as he's circling those hoops. And just watch the power as he takes on the players. I mean, those are big Senior Bowl invitees that he is just throwing backwards. So I like, again, for every player you can mention, I can almost say I'd rather have another pick and this guy at 30 instead of the guy we're talking about at 9 or 10. It's like, give me another second round pick and I'll take this guy instead. Treylon Burks, okay, I like Treylon. I like Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas. But give me Christian Watson in your second rounder and I'll get 2 players. So it's a deep, deep draft. It's a draft where you don't necessarily want to be at the top, but it's a draft where you like having a bunch of picks. I mean, that sounds weird, but it is. I can name 8 edge rushers I'd be excited to have, that I'd be looking forward to have, that are going to be around in this second round, top of the third. Some of these guys have to drop. That's basic math.
Yeah, and it's a weird draft too, because while there might not be a top 5 guy like obvious right now, it's one of those drafts where the best guy in the draft might be like picked at 30 or something like that. Like it really could happen in that way where it's like, oh, people just were sleeping on this player or really weren't interested in this guy for this reason. And they kind of overlooked him. And then all of a sudden, or he's a developmental guy, right? Where you're like, I see the traits in him. Okay, yeah, we could work with that. And then you turn him into something else. But it's just one of those drafts where it doesn't have a lot of top 5 picks, but it's like, hey, man, you can get a steal. And I guess it sounds weird when you think about it in traditional terms, but that's really how this draft class looks like it's going to be aiming out to be, where it's like, oh, yeah, that guy you got in the second round might be the best player in the draft. Like it could end up like that because there's just nobody at the top of the draft you feel like is going to be such an overwhelming talent. Maybe Kyle Hamilton, that you're like, okay, yeah, that's a guarantee right there. You know what I mean? So it's like
I might go Kyle Hamilton number 1. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
You took a safety number 1 in this draft? Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Well, was it the Lions number 1 right now?
Slide past 4 for me.
Yeah, and it's the Lions at 1, and they're kind of doing the same thing they did in the early 2000s. Well, no, it's not the Lions. It's the Jacksonville. Right? Yeah, Jacksonville. It is. I don't know what Jacksonville's going to do. I have no idea what that franchise.
I don't think they're that bad at tackle, but getting a protector for your franchise quarterback, because Trevor Lawrence is the truth. He's the real deal. These guys, everybody wants the hot takes on these quarterbacks. It's like, well, the quarterbacks that went high went to crappy teams. They're not supposed to be very good in their first. Well, Mac Jones was really good. Mac Jones was okay. He was average. He was good for a rookie. He went to the Patriots. You put Mac Jones in Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence in New England last year, we're having a totally different conversation. So Evan Neal makes sense for them. It makes sense. But, again, this is a pick where they've got their quarterback. They may have the number 1 next year, and they could just clean house next year. If they're bad enough to get the number 1 next year, it could be one of those 3 number 1s plus a player type of trade down scenario.
Oh, yeah, it's going to go crazy next year, right? Because there's going to be it's going to be some thirst in the quarterback market after this, because you got a lot of guys coming off their 5th-year option that are going to be free agents. They're going to walk. So
there's going to be some old guys too.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers is still out there. Matt Ryan is still out there.
Yeah. So who knows what's going to happen with those guys? And then, the big thing that's going to change is like the Lamar Jackson contract situation in Baltimore is starting to get to an interesting place where it looks like it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it is possible that they don't come to a deal. And we're going to see a situation we've never seen before where a guy that young might just be a free agent right after his rookie deal. That's going to do something. I don't know what it's going to do, but it's going to do something for that market.
And then Quincy, what happens if Deshaun Watson gets cleared?
Yeah. So
what happens if he gets cleared and he gets put into the pool at the same time?
It's gonna be a wild year next year when it comes to that quarterback position. It's already been I think it's gonna be the wild year people are predicting this offseason to be, because everybody's like, oh, everybody's gonna get traded. I don't know if that happens this year, but next year, yeah, it's gonna be wild, because it's gonna be a lot of options, and history tells us when teams have a lot of options at quarterback, they don't really do a good job at making decisions there. So.
Well, and that's the thing. One of the phrases I really hate hearing, Quincy, is best player available. The best player. Well, they took the best player available. Did they? Are you sure about that? How about I take the rest of the draft and you take this guy, and we'll bet a year's salary on who ends up with the better player. I've got these 200 guys. You've got one. So saying that they took the best player available is nonsense. The odds are going to tell me that a better player is going to come down the line. Now, the best player who you have scouted the highest, the best drafts are the ones where you can fit a need with what you think is the best prospect available. That's good. Where you start getting in trouble is when you reach to fill a need. It's like, oh, we really need a wide receiver here. We don't really like this guy, but boy, we really have to get a wide receiver. Well, this guy can't play, and now you've wasted a pick. Now you still don't have a wide receiver, and you just hurt some other place on your team. So best player available is relative. If you can take a need with a player that you really like, it turns out to be the best drafts. And through this draft, the best players seem to be defensive line. I don't care if it's interior, edge. Edge is very deep. Defensive line, edge, tackle, and there's some decent corners in this one. So that's where I think the best players available. That's where the deepest players are. So if you've got a need at those premium positions, you should be able to fill it with the best player available when your pick comes up.
Yeah. So you're talking about somebody that's caught my eye. It feels like they've caught your eye. Christian Watson, a wide receiver out of North Dakota State. Now, full disclosure, I went to Youngstown State. So I always keep an eye on what North Dakota State does because, like, as somebody who has witnessed that dynasty for the last 10 years in person, there's a lot of players that come out of North Dakota State every year because they basically have a Division I program down there. But it's one of those schools where I think people kind of like go, oh, small school, and they kind of write these guys out. But I'm like, a lot of guys, a lot of top picks have come out of North Dakota State. A lot of really good players have come out of there. They really have a good system going, and they're pro ready more than you would think coming out of the FCS because they pretty much run a Shanahan offense over there. And with Watson, you see all the Shanahan stuff that the Browns like to do there, right? The end arounds to the wide receiver, the deep post, all that stuff that he is used to doing there. How ready do you feel like he is as a prospect? And do you think this is a guy that's going to be that stock's going to jump once we see him in the combine?
I don't think he makes it past the third round. We got some video in the hopper for you if you want to click on him that I took of him at the Senior Bowl. He definitely caught my eye. 6'4", 211 pounds, and you can see he's pretty solidly built. With that build, 10-inch hands. What Kenny Pickett, the talk about him is about 8 1/4. So that's the concern there. Great body control. I think I've got a video in here. A part of the video in here is him also blocking. He is a hell of a blocker. So that's another reason I like him. But I told you earlier, Quincy, I said one of my biases is I like the big receivers. So you say 6'4", 211 and can run a little bit, I'm automatically interested. So Christian Watson, it's like, okay, you need a receiver. This is a good blocking one here that I put in that one for a reason in that play there. It's like, yeah, I don't necessarily want Treylon Burks at 12. Now, if I just needed a wide receiver, I'm one player away. I'm might go the Jamar Chase route. If I'm the Atlanta Falcons and I got holes all over the place, including both lines of scrimmage, there's no way I'm going a wide receiver because it doesn't make any sense. If I can't run, tackle, or block, what good does a pass catcher do me? So I would much rather, again, I said I'd rather have a player in the second round and another pick than most of the guys that you can name in the first round. This is one of those guys, Quincy. I'd rather have Quincy Carter. I'm sorry, you're Quincy Carter. I'd rather have Christian Watson and another second round pick than pretty much any receiver you could give me in the first round.
Yeah, it's really one of those drafts where I kind of hope they find a way to trade back. If I'm a Browns fan, that's my hope is like, yeah, you trade back and you can get your hands on like what, Christian Watson, Perion Winfrey, or what, maybe even you might even be able to get an older guy who might slip because of his age, like Haskell Garrett or somebody like that. Yeah, Devontae Wyatt.
Devontae Wyatt, defensive lineman from the University of Georgia. Him and Perion Winfrey are very, very similar players. They could play 3-4 end, or they could play defensive tackle, long, quick, right at 300 pounds. Players like that. There's like I said, you start looking at the edge guys. You're like, okay, I said 8. I wasn't joking when I said 8. I could probably name 8 guys that I'd be pretty excited to have. We talked about Aiden Hutchinson, the big names at the top, Kayvon Thibodeau, George Karlaftis has been mentioned in there sometimes. Jermaine Johnson, Florida State. We talked about him earlier. Several of those guys. And then you go up to Minnesota, kind of up in your neck of the woods up there. You know, you got Boye Mafe, Kingsley and Enagbare at South Carolina. You know, these guys that are 6'4", 6'5", 245 to 260 pounds with bounce. You go Sam Williams, who looks like a wide receiver who's 255 pounds at Ole Miss, who if he gets cleared and he answers all the questions about an arrest that he had, and he got reinstated, so we'll see, but he's going to have to answer those questions at the combine. That'll be a big part of him. But watch for Sam Williams. Guy's a freak. You know, 11, 12 sacks last year with 40 tackles in 8 or 9 games. Edge, I'm telling you, I'm excited. You need pass rushers. Who doesn't need pass rushers? You can never have enough of those guys. So when we talk about the guys that can come in and make an immediate impact, I don't have to learn scheme. I say, Quincy, go get the quarterback. That's your job. It's 3rd down and 12. Go get that guy. Forget scheme. I don't have a big steep learning curve about all these complex coverages. Go get him.
Just get
I can do that, coach. You know, instant impact.
Especially for the tackles, right? Yeah, you just want to see a D tackle, right? Who can get upfield. Like that's what I think it gets overcomplicated when we look at these guys and people are like, oh, well, how does he do that and that? Can he get upfield, right? Like that's why I like Perrion Winfrey. I know he can get upfield. Like if he can't do anything, he will get upfield. It might be an issue for him because he gets upfield so fast sometimes, but that's a problem you can live with, right? But if you have somebody like the Browns had Andrew Billings on their roster this year, couldn't get upfield. It was a massive issue because he would just get bullied. He would open up holes, and it would really negate having Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett out there to the point where they had to cut him in the middle of the season. So you just want your tackles to get upfield. You know what I mean? Like if they have that ability in college to just one-on-one get upfield, especially for a situation like the Browns where the interior guys aren't going to see as many double teams as normal because teams are going to roll protection to Myles Garrett. Like it's just going to happen. So you know, when you're in that situation, like a Pittsburgh, like a Cleveland, you know, where you have these top level pass rushers, you really just want to see these guys get upfield because that's what you want to know. Their job's not going to be that complicated, you know?
Well, and Perrion Winfrey, you talk about being born to do something, you know, the physical skill set is just different. He's a shade under 6'4". Let me see, 303 pounds with a 7'2" wingspan.
Oh man.
At 6'4". And when you watch the video of him, he knows how to use it too. He's got like a slingshot move where he gets his hands out and through somebody, and then he's won the rep. You know, It's like a reach for a boxer. These guys are trying to block him, and they're flailing around like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Then he's got him. Now he can dispatch him wherever he wants to. He can swim move. He can the rip. He's got him. He was the MVP of the Senior Bowl, and it was well deserved. And it wasn't just for the game; it was for the week. He was really good. One of these guys I say may have played his way into the back end of the first round, may fall into the second. Devontae Wyatt, similar like that. Sam Williams, similar like that. Jermaine Johnson, all these guys that are like that. Somebody has to still be around in the 40s when you're picking again in the second.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting draft class, but I want to thank Scott for coming on. Scott, let them know where to find you if they want to see more of you.
You can hit me at Scout Kennedy. I'll post a bunch of stuff there on Twitter. And then my YouTube channel is just youtube.com/C, like the third letter out in the alphabet, and then my name, Scott Kennedy. So appreciate you having me on, and hit up with any questions. I'll follow up on this segment and with any questions you might have and players. And if you go to my channel, there's a bunch of Senior Bowl stuff in there. If you have any questions in there, just put it in there. I'm pretty OCD about checking on my mentions and stuff in there as well. But Quincy, I appreciate you having me on today.
Oh, no problem, man. But everybody else, hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed this draft preview. Well, maybe we'll call it a combine preview. I don't know what we're gonna call it yet. But whatever I end up titling this video, hope you guys enjoy it. But everybody have a great day and have a good night.